Hello everyone, I am the storyteller. Tonight, I'll tell you a story wrapped in dread and steeped in the unknown, an experience Daniel would never speak of again after accepting a last-minute job as a forest park ranger. Settle in, listen to the wind move through the trees, and learn what waited for him when the sun disappeared behind the ridge. I shouldn't be writing this. I should be packing up my survey gear, hitching the battered truck, and getting the hell out of what's left of Barden County. But the wind won't stop howling, and the map still won't hold. I arrived here 3 weeks ago on paper, at least. The days slip oddly in these parts. Feels like I just got in, and yet the creases in my skin say otherwise. Time buckles here, as if the land breathes in irregular pulses, the kind that never align with any watch I own. But I should start where the nightmares began. Not the dream kind, no. This started with the lie compass told. The assignment came wrapped in bureaucratic blandness. U.S. Geological Reserve Initiative, Northern New Mexico, Section 12, Barden Quadrant. Full remap, update elevation data, GPS overlay, standard, dry, easy paycheck. My name is Dr. Conrad Elroy, Ph.D. in geospatial topology and field cartography. I've mapped unstable regions in Chile, Siberia, and half the Arctic archipelago. I've dealt with shifting tectonic plates, magnetic anomalies, and freak weather. I've never believed in ghosts, gods, or the kind of folklore that stains small-town diners with yellowing newspaper clippings and Bigfoot plaster prints. I believe in data. That faith lasted until the second sunset at the Barden relay station. The road in was cracked, bone-dry, winding, and bitter under the tires. From the last viable cell signal at Red Chimney, I'd driven 6 hours west into dead land. No fences, no markers, just arid scrub and the kind of sky that crushed perspective. Then the dust began. I first mistook it for a storm front, but it never moved. A fixed curtain of ochre mist rose from the southern mesa and hung there, static as a corpse's breath. The relay station was tucked into a hollow where wagon routes once split east and west back when people thought they could tame this place. The structures were absurd in their survival. A row of decaying utility wagons, vintage 1880s, restored in the 1970s as temporary shelter for USGS teams. Only one remained intact enough for habitation: iron wheels, oak bones, interior modified with radio equipment and field cots. A placard on the door, Wagon 6. Entry requires sunset clearance. That was the first rule I didn't understand. The caretaker greeted me with the kind of silence that felt sharpened. Old man, thin, crooked neck like he'd tilted once in youth and never righted. He wore a stitched ranger hat and boots caked with red clay older than asphalt. "You must be the mapman," he said. "You're early." I wasn't. His name was Tomel Judd, and according to the USGS files, he'd maintained the station since 1974, supposedly just a night watchman for a facility that hadn't been active in decades. But the station logs, those still handwritten and sun-bleached ledgers, showed entries dated last week in 3 different handwritings. One of them, unmistakably, was Judd's. "Don't go near the south wagon after sundown," he told me that first night, after leading me to wagon 3, the one with functioning solar lights and a rigged kitchenette. "Why?" I asked. He scraped a thumbnail along the doorframe. 'cause it don't like being looked at. 3 days in, I set up my instruments, LiDAR drone, differential GPS node, analog sextant as backup, and, of course, my compass, which was the first thing to go wrong. At precisely 4:06 p.m. on day 3, the compass spun. Not once, not in reaction to electromagnetic interference. No, this was a slow, dreamlike pirouette. North became west, then east, then nowhere. I checked the drone. It had drifted off course, mapping a spiral trajectory that shouldn't be physically possible, not without an obstruction, not without GPS jamming. I ran diagnostics, no errors. Then I noticed something worse. The terrain itself had changed. Small things, subtle but wrong. A dry creek bed I'd crossed the day before had vanished. A ridgeline that should have faced south now bent toward the fixed dust wall in the east. And the way the sunlight hit the rocks no longer matched my elevation model. When I brought this to Judd, he just muttered, "Told you not to trust direction." After the 3rd day, that's when the place tests your shape. Test your shape. I didn't know what that meant. Still don't. Not completely. But that night I woke to scratching under the wagon. It wasn't animal. It followed a patterned pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It echoed up the iron wheels and into my bones. I stayed still, breath caged in my throat, until dawn scratched the horizon. The rule book came the next morning, dropped outside my door like a paper corpse, cloth-bound, no title, just field containment. Revision 3. Inside were 14 rules, typed in courier font, some redacted. Rule number 1. Do not attempt to correct your map after day 3. The land will remember the lie. I laughed out loud. Then I looked at my LiDAR model again. Where a flat plateau should have been, there was now a depression shaped like a human rib cage, nearly 80 meters wide. I hadn't mapped that. That night I set up a microphone outside the wagon, just to prove it was wind or mice, anything logical. The recorder picked up something else, dot at 3:12 a.m., clear as rain in mono-channel. Where is the 6th? Pause. It is not written. I played the audio 10 times, then erased it. It's the only thing I've ever deleted from a field record. Curiosity killed more than cats. I broke Rule 1. I adjusted the digital topography to account for the terrain changes. I uploaded the corrected model to the satellite relay. The next morning, Wagon 6 was missing. I don't mean broken. I don't mean vandalized. I mean gone. No tracks. No drag marks. Just absence. Like a tooth pulled from a gum line older than bones. When I confronted Judd, he didn't look surprised. You didn't believe, he said. Now you've got its attention. I tried to leave. Truck wouldn't start. Not battery, not fuel. The keys had melted into the ignition. The sky turned orange at noon ... And in the far south, just beyond the edge of the dust wall, I saw it. A figure, not walking, not floating, sliding, like muscle pulled across glass. It had too many shoulders, and it was holding something in its hand. Something that looked like a survey marker, one I hadn't planted yet. The 4th night, after Wagon 6 vanished, I dreamt I was inside it. Except I was awake. You'll scoff, as I once did. Dreams don't carry ambient temperature data. They don't retain residual smells of coal, oil, and ash. They don't imprint dust patterns onto the solace of your real-world boots. but this one did. Inside the wagon, the air was thick with static, like an iron storm pressed against the lungs. There were no windows, no doors, just a single black slab fixed into the wall where the bunk should have been. Something pulsed faintly behind it, like sonar or a heartbeat. I awoke, gasping, covered in a fine gray grit I couldn't identify. My recorder, left on out of habit, picked up the following just before I sat up. Interference, Wagon 6 is not absent. You are. Her name was Liza Ingram. She arrived midday on foot, caked in dried blood and red silt. Claimed her Jeep had jackknifed 30 miles east when the terrain folded up like a bad blueprint. She was a freelance field journalist, following whispers of government cover-ups and archaeological silencing out here. Said she'd been tracking ghost counties, places erased from census records without explanation. I didn't trust her. She spoke like someone who'd read too many conspiracy forums and a few topographic maps. Still, I couldn't ignore that she'd arrived through the same cursed dust I hadn't dared approach. Nor could I ignore the sigil burned into the back of her canvas jacket. 3 intersecting circles, each inscribed with compass directions, none pointing true north. When I asked about it, she only said, found it etched into stone near a broken cattle chute. Thought it looked cool. Judd refused to speak to her, wouldn't even look. Rule number 5. If something knocks once, respond. If it knocks twice, stay silent. If it knocks 3 times, don't move at all. That rule revealed itself scrawled in charcoal on the inside of my cot's frame. I hadn't written it. That night, it knocked 3 times. You don't walk into the dust, you descend into it. Liza and I hiked south past the dry creek bed, now flowing backward, uphill, and slow gulps. We crossed into the dust curtain around to 40 p.m. The first thing you notice is the temperature drop, like a cave mouth, but wrong, the air isn't cooler, it's just less alive, stagnant, perfect stillness that vibrates behind the eyes, visibility. Maybe 10 feet. Sound, distorted like submerged microphones. We found an object 30 yards in a surveyor's transit, circa 1886, half buried in sediment, covered in strained calcifications that hummed faintly if touched. The glass lens had melted inward. A metal tag dangled from the side. I read it aloud before I could stop myself. Property of a winter, return upon completion. That was my old mentor, Edgar Winter, presumed dead in '93 during a mapping project in Utah. He'd never been to Barden County, or so I thought. Back in the wagon, I reviewed the terrain scans again. They now displayed a second plateau overlaying the first, same elevation, different coordinates, only visible on infrared, like a shadow twin of the land itself. Every time I tried to align them, the software crashed. The crash report read, map error, equivalent coordinates multiplied beyond Euclidean limits. Not a real error code. No system I've ever used includes the word Euclidean. I turned off the computer, then the analog compass began spinning again. Liza was the one who saw him first. At dawn, standing at the eastern ridge, she pointed into the dust. He's watching, she whispered, buried to the waist, no face, but he watches. I scanned the ridge, nothing. But the ground moved slightly where she pointed. A ripple not seismic, biological. That night Jed finally spoke to her, his voice hoarse, unused. If you see the man who is no shadow, leave your name behind. You won't need it where he sends you. I broke another rule. I touched the stone embedded at the base of the South Wagon's original resting place. It wasn't warm. It was aware. The moment my fingers brushed it, I felt not pain, but recognition, as if something behind the rock exhaled, acknowledging me. Then came the sound, not external, internal. My teeth vibrated. My bones hum. A voice filled me, not spoken, but etched directly into consciousness. You will map us as we were before time's tendril split. I blacked out. Woke 7 hours later with a surveyor's triangle carved into my forearm, not bleeding, perfectly clean. On the 5th night, Liza came to my wagon trembling. "They're coming out," she whispered. They moved sideways through stone. I heard them beneath the sand. I opened the door. The air was folded, not mist, not wind, folded like paper, bent between dimensions, as if space had creased at the edge of our understanding. And there, in the split, stood a wagon, not one of ours. This one was constructed from bones. It wasn't metaphor. That wagon, if you could call it that, breathed. Its skeletal chassis pulsed in the moonlight, ribs bowing and flexing like gills on some vast, blind leviathan. The bones weren't fossil white, but a greasy yellow, like something carved from marrow too long exposed. We watched it from the crest of the station ridge, Liza gripping the salt pouch Judd had wordlessly handed her hours earlier. It wasn't salt for flavor, it was barrier. The locals, what few remained, called it grave salt. Judd stood behind us, whispering in his gravel-toned voice, "It don't move till you speak its name, but it listens, always listens, and it eats the ones who map in straight lines." I asked what that meant. He just tapped my forearm where the triangle had been carved. "The mark means it's noticed you that night." The next rule revealed itself, not written, not whispered, but printed inside my left eye when I awoke, staring at the wagon ceiling. Rule number 9. Never sleep in the same wagon twice. It can count, and it remembers your smell. I'd slept 3 nights in wagon 3. The temperature inside dropped 5 degrees. Something thumped inside the mattress, not beneath it, inside. I slept outside in the dust that night. Judd showed us how to lay the circle. Not a perfect one that was important. A flawed loop was harder to find from the other side. Straight lines and perfect curves attract attention, he muttered, dragging a stick through the sand. They hate that. They see it as intrusion. We used 6 pouches, each mixed with crushed sage and iron filings. Liza insisted we add ammonium chloride, old myth from her research on Appalachian protections. Judd nodded. Might help or might piss him off. We didn't ask what them meant. The next morning, something had licked the salt ring from the outside. Long, sinuous tongue marks furrowed into the ground. Something had tried to find the break. The second appearance came without sound. No creak, no thud, just presence. At 3:03 a.m., my instruments all failed simultaneously. The LiDAR blinked out the GPS through a latitude in the Indian Ocean. My pocket compass shattered. I stepped outside the wagon and saw it. The wagon of salt and teeth, as Liza would later name it, stood 20 yards closer than before. Its undercarriage was wet, as if dragged through something that bled. From its yoke dangled the lantern made of stitch lips. They moved faintly in the wind. Then I saw the face in the window, not pressed against the glass, part of it, as if the wagon had absorbed someone mid-scream and forgotten to finish. That morning, Judd poured coffee from a rusted pot and finally opened up. He'd seen it too. Back in 1979, same place, different team. There were 7 of us then, smart men, smarter than me. Came here to verify what the old maps couldn't explain. Why the Barrens refused straight lines. He stared into the mug, eyes hollow. They all slept in the same wagon just once. The next morning it was stretched longer than it was the day before. 27 feet, when it had been 12. Inside, everything was twisted, like it had remembered a different geometry. I asked what happened to the men. He only said, "They left, but not in any direction you'd recognize." We heard it again. 3 knocks on the hull of the wagon, slow, deliberate. I stayed still. Liza didn't. She turned her head just slightly, enough to peek toward the nose. That's all it took. The knock repeated inside her skull. She collapsed, bleeding from the ear, whispering something in Cherokee, her grandmother's tongue. She told me once, but the words came out backward. For a full minute, her voice was someone else's. Then silence. She came to with no memory, but her eyes had changed, not color, not shape, direction. She no longer looked at things. She looked through them. We returned to the ridge of dusk. The bone wagon stood silent until the last light fell behind the mesas. Then its door creaked open. Inside, not darkness, not light, something rotating, slowly, like the pupil of an eye made from ancient star matter and desert fossils. I saw landscapes folded into impossible recursion horizons that bled into each other, mountains climbing upside down into canyons, a river that flowed in for direction simultaneously. At the center stood a figure, a man, I think, but wrong, clothed in skin not his own, wearing a belt made of coordinates. He raised one hand and pointed to me, spoke a phrase that I still can't translate, not with English, not with math, but I felt its shape. The land remembers the trespass of measurement. Back in the wagon, I unrolled my survey chart. It had changed, not just in contour, not just in color. The map was breathing. Each contour line rose and fell like lungs. My annotations had curled into glyphs, pulsing with dim bioluminescence. A new line had appeared across the southern ridge, one I hadn't marked. It read, "Here lies the cartographer who would not forget." I looked at my reflection in the window. I was wearing Edgar Winter's glasses. I don't wear glasses. I tore open the back panel of Wagon 3 the morning after the map moved. Something had been scratching from inside the wall all night. Not mice, not wine. The rhythm was to specific 7 taps, then 3, a beat I later matched 2 Morse. RED. Behind the panel was an object wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a length of what appeared to be braided human hair. A field journal, handwritten, dates scrawled in pencil. May, July, 1887. Name inside, T.W. Winter, Edgar. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I turned the page, and it bled. The journal wasn't ordinary. The ink shimmered faintly, not black, but violet, almost ultraviolet, visible only at certain angles. The pages shifted under light like scales. The first entry read, May 4th, 1887. The sandstone here remembers too well. I set the marker, and the ground spoke back. My assistant Tilling insisted the whisper was just the wind, but I know the syllables. They called my name before I gave it. Later, June 19th, our camp was approached by a creature that wore Tilling's skin but forgot his walk. It moved with confidence, but its steps never disturbed the dust. And then July 2nd. If I vanish, know this: the wagons are not transport. They are containers. One is still sealed. For God's sake, do not break the salt seam on the south ridge. I turned the page. There was no July 3rd, just an empty sheet, faintly warm to the touch. The sandstone ridge near the dust wall had shifted again. A cleft opened at its base previously solid. Liza and I climbed down at dawn. Inside, a hollow chamber carved by wind or claw. Lining the walls were names, dozens of them, etched into the stone like memorials, not chiseled, not painted, erupted as if the sandstone itself had grown them. James M. Baylor minus 1902. Desiree Wells, 1936. Edgar Winter minus 1887. The final name read. Conrad Elra minus 2025. Carved in the same style, with the same pulsing shimmer. I didn't sign that, I whispered. Liza replied, you don't sign, it writes you in. That night, Liza sat by the salt line, face pale, voice brittle. She admitted she'd been here before, as a child, 1997. Her parents were park geologists contracted to assess seismic stability of the region. They brought her to this ridge, camp to nights. On the third morning, her father was gone, no signs, no prints, just a spiral carved into his cottonwood slats. Her mother refused to speak of it. Years later, she killed herself in a motel in Nevada. The only note, you can't trace what won't hold still. Liza came back to prove something, to finish mapping the story, and maybe to be written in, too. Around midnight, we saw Wagon 6 again. It had reappeared. This time it wasn't sitting on the ground, it was hovering, maybe 2 inches above it, casting no shadow, despite the full moon. Its door creaked open, and from within came a single sheet of paper, drifting out like a dry leaf. I picked it up, typed, in the same courier font as the first rulebook. Addendum, rule number 13. If your name appears in the rock, your path has already looped. There is no true beginning, only re-entry. I turned it over. The back showed a map, not of terrain but of memories. Mine, labeled like features, Gilt Ridge, 2006. Fault line of failure minus 2013. The canyon where you let her die, 2019. Places I had never told anyone about. Not even Liza. I returned to the journal. The blank page now held fresh writing. They will ask for a trade, a thing only you can give. Do not offer blood. Blood is universal. Offer location. They crave only the things that can no longer be found. And beneath it, a symbol, 3 intersecting cartographic triangles. A sigil of the lost place. I traced it. The wagon's lantern lit itself. On the 4th night, we heard footsteps, hundreds of them, marching. But the ground never shook. I stepped outside. A procession of figures passed silently between the wagons, some human, some only wearing human, like borrowed coats. Each bore an object, maps, sextants, bones, mirrors. At the rear of the line, a child with my voice, humming a tune I hadn't remembered since age 8. Judd stood motionless at the edge of his wagon, They're headed to the gap, he said. What gap? He pointed west to the breach, where the frontier ends and the memory of land begins. As dawn approached, I felt something stir inside my bag. The map was gone. In its place, a folded note. Trade accepted. Your path is now a coordinate. She will follow. I looked at Liza. She was crying, but she wasn't crying for me. Coordinates shouldn't scream. They shouldn't carry sound or intention or pain. They should be cold numbers, decimals, elevation tags, but the one that appeared at the top of my printed survey chart at 3:33 a.m. centered in red, blinking faintly how the moment I read it aloud, not audibly, no echo in the wagon. The scream happened inside my chest as if my lungs briefly remembered drowning. The numbers, 36.667. 105.1 to 1W, a location due west of the ridge, past the salt line, in the place locals called the Echo Grave. I didn't name it. It's been on old regional maps since the 1930s, always misspelled, sometimes appearing, sometimes not, sometimes shifted by as much as 10 miles between revisions. Nobody builds there. Not anymore. Judd tried to stop us. Those coordinates don't go anywhere, he said, hands trembling. They're instructions, not destinations. I asked what he meant. He didn't answer with words. He unbuttoned his shirt and showed us his chest, tattooed into his skin a full topographic map, wrinkled with age, but clear. One section had been scratched out, jagged, bloody, still healing, mapped at once, he rasped. That place, that coordinate, it wrote itself onto me. Then it started, growing, had to cut it out with a rusted key. Can't let them finish their version of me. He pressed a rusted compass into my hand. Use this. If it starts to hum, turn back. We left at noon. Liza led the way. She said she dreamed of this path since she was 12 the night after her father vanished. Same wind patterns, same cloud formations. She called it the recursion path. Halfway to the coordinate, the horizon bent. I'm not being poetic. It visibly warped as if the earth curved upward into a wall, then back down again like the edge of a cylinder. My GPS malfunctioned. The altimeter spun into negatives. The air grew dense, syrupy, and filled with the scent of cedar and blood. The ground became too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the scrape of our boots and the low vibration in my teeth. Then Liza stopped. There, she whispered, the breach. The coordinate led us to an opening in the stone. Not a cave, not a tunnel, a crease. A vertical split in sandstone, no wider than a man's shoulders, leading somewhere. No light emerged, no echo returned. On the edge of the split, someone had painted long ago to words in what looked like ochre or dried blood. Don't finish. Liza reached for the edge of the crease. Her fingers brushed the stone and vanished. No blood, no dismemberment, just gone, like a program error. She pulled her hand back and held it to her chest. Trembling, I was somewhere else. She said, "What did you see?" She whispered, "My mother," eating her own name. Judd's compass began to vibrate in my pocket, low at first, then rising like a generator winding up. I pulled it out. The needle was still, but the metal case was hot to hot. Then it cracked, and from the crack came a whisper, "The line is known. The map completes itself in blood." I dropped it. The compass clattered once, split down the middle, and released a faint sigh like someone relieved to finally die. We pressed on at exactly 36.667, 105.1 to 1W. The world opened. The coordinate marked a field of flat stone. Nothing grew, nothing moved. Just windless stillness and dust so fine it clung to the eyelids. And in the center, a circle of vertebrae, too large for any known animal, arranged like a compass rose, each pointing at different cardinal rules. Inside that circle, a pit, not deep, but hungry dot as I stepped close. The air around the pit screamed again, not sound, but vibration, a frequency that translated directly into my thoughts. It screamed my thesis title, my greatest shame, the lie I'd told my team back in Alaska. The pit knew what I buried, and it was offering to dig it up. Without a word, Liza dropped into the pit. I called to her nothing, I shouted nothing. Then her voice echoed up, distorted, like warped vinyl. You were there in 2019, you watched. You didn't stop it. I staggered back. 2019, the rocks lie. The assistant, her, I hadn't spoken of it. Not ever. Liza wasn't speaking anymore. The pit was, the stone around the pit rippled, revealing carved glyphs, a topographic map, not of the terrain, but of consciousness. Not memory, not dreams, but the buried things beneath both. Coordinates curved where guilt pooled. Elevations shifted with regret. The legend simply read, all who measure will be measured. I understood then what the coordinate truly was. It wasn't a point on earth. It was a soul's convergence, a cartographic summoning circle. To chart it was to summon what lay beneath, and I had charted it in full. It rose as I fled, not physically, but conceptually. A pressure in the air and the thoughts. A syntax made of shape and remorse, a language of elevation and sign, and a voice deep, honey smooth, ancient. You wanted to know what the land hides. Now you are part of the strata. Lay down, cartographer. You are already fossilized. I blacked out. I awoke at the station. No sign of Liza. No sign of the map. My arm is bruised, shaped like the compass rose made of vertebrae. The wagons are quiet, but the sky has new stars. Ones I didn't map, ones that blink in Morse, and the message repeats every night. She is still descending. You must finish the map. When I awoke, the sky was wrong. It wasn't just the stars, the entire vault had shifted. No North Star, no familiar constellations, just a spiraled band of unfamiliar lights that pulsed slowly, irregularly, as if the firmament itself had a heartbeat. I scanned for satellite data. Nothing. Jet didn't answer his door. I knocked once, twice, 3 times. No reply. His wagon was open. Inside, the cot was still warm. On the table, a compass, a tin of coffee, and a spine small, curved. Human, the walls were covered in maps. But not of this region, not of Earth. I felt it underfoot as I stepped outside something hard beneath the dust just west of Wagon 3. I dug it out slowly, fingers trembling. It wasn't stone, it was a bone map, an ossified femur etch with topographic lines and latitude markings in languages I don't know, some curving in 4-dimensional spirals, others terminating in the symbol I now associate with them, a circle with no center, and stamped cleanly into the head of the bone. U.S. Geological Survey Field, Operative Elroy, deceased, 2025. My name, my year, it was my femur. The next map came unbidden, printed by the field printer I'd long since disabled. It fed itself out like a tongue from a throat. This one was mirror-reversed, as if drawn by someone standing behind me, but I could still read it. The path traced a looping corridor that led beneath the wagons, through a place marked simply the crawl space, the annotation. Last known location of Liza Ingram. Coordinates unstable. Proceed without name. That line chilled me. Not proceed with caution. Not proceed carefully, proceed without name, as if it could be taken. The field containment manual changed again, it now bled when touched. The typewritten text slithered across the pages in response to proximity. New rules had replaced old. Rule number 2 updated. If the map records your bones, bury the coordinates before sunrise. Rule number 10, names are bait. During descent, speak only in equations. Rule number 15. If she calls your name from below, measure the echo. If it returns inverted, it is not her. There were now 22 rules. I had only followed 3. There was a hatch beneath wagon 6 now fully returned, rusted shut, but marked with fresh fingerprints and salt. I opened it with Judd's crowbar, braced for rats or collapsed stone. What I found was a shaft, impossibly deep for the terrain descending in sharp, hexagonal patterns, lined with glyphs that pulsed faintly as I passed them. The walls were made of compressed time. No, I don't expect that to make sense, but each stone I touched showed me a different epoch, some prehistoric, some apocalyptic, some not yet imagined. And in the pit's center I saw a figure, Liza, or what used to be Liza. She turned slowly, mouth stitched in a smile not made by joy. Her skin had the color of map parchment vein with contour lines and elevation markers. Her eyes had no whites, only rolling coordinates. She spoke, but it wasn't speech. It was a projection lines, diagrams, terrain collapse, simulations pouring from her open mouth in stuttering flashes. I held the bone. She said in my voice, it remembered its purpose. We are to chart the void where thought decays. I stepped back. She pointed to the wall. There, carved with impossible precision, was my fossil, not dead, not decayed, waiting, a perfectly preserved version of myself curled into the fetal position, eyes open, staring at something unseen. I spoke her name, Liza. A moment's pause, then her head tilted backward to far, and from her throat came the echo of my own voice. Liza ... Liza ... Liza ... Each repetition more distant, each one slightly off like an impersonation degrading with each bounce. Then the final echo returned. A dash sil ... a dash z ... azz ... Not her name. Something else, some hungry permutation. I ran outside. The sky was worse, the spiral had widened. One of the stars was now visibly moving, closer, not a meteor, not a ship, a mine burning, immense, dragging behind it a trail of memories it did not make. It pulsed once, my left arm went numb, my thoughts fractured. From the wagons came a chorus of voices, all speaking at once. The map is your soul. To forget is to survive. You will be restructured. The shape of man is not final. I collapsed. When I awoke, a new map had printed itself on my chest, tattooed in raised scar tissue, a spiral corridor leading inward. At the center, a symbol I haven't dared draw. It hums when I look at it. I don't know what it means, but I think it's the way back, or the way out, or the place where I began, and maybe ... where I ended, too. I no longer trust dimensions. The crawl space beneath Wagon 6 should not exist. Judd once told me, some places are thinner than others, like the land forgot how to hold shape. I thought it was metaphor, but tonight, crawling on hands and knees into the underbelly of the wagon, I crossed into a corridor shorter inside than it was outside, yet still took me longer to traverse. Each breath came with the taste of copper and fennel. The walls were not made of wood. They felt warm, pliable, like tongue muscle, slick with saliva. At exactly 42 feet in, I heard something breathing. Not mine, the sound came from above and below, as if the corridor coiled around a body too large to ever fully enter. At the end of the corridor, lit only by the dim glow of my chest map's scarred spiral, I found a hatch. Etched onto was a diagram and architectural rendering of a place not built by humans. No right angles, no gravity center, a recursive stairwell leading down, then sideways, then inward through thought. The legend was printed in 4 languages. One of them resembled Aramaic, another was binary. The last was my own handwriting, somehow etched into the metal. Survey complete. Begin mental descent protocol. Do not think of her face. Do not recall the shape of water. You are now within the crawl space of thought. I found the final page of the field manual, not printed, carved into the roof of the crawl space. Rule number 24. If you map the place that maps you, do not return to the surface. The topsoil cannot hold you anymore. Below it, my full name. Below that, hers, Liza and Engram, now crossed out. When I descended through the hatch, I did not enter a room. I entered a memory. Not mine. It was the land's. I stood in a Dust Bolera schoolhouse, sunken beneath sand and time. The chalkboard, still coded in half-erased equations about wind shear and soil density. But the students were not children. They were geologists, blindfolded and twitching, repeating fragments of forgotten maps, loud and broken English and stone-click syllables. One lifted his head. It was my father, but younger and drawn. He opened his mouth and spilled a topographic grid, blooded and still writhing. He whispered, cheese underneath always was, always waiting. The walls of the crawl space pulsed with soundless knowledge data that couldn't be learned without losing something else in return. I saw a map that devoured its surveyor. A cartographer's tongue turned to stone after naming the 5th ridge. A GPS signal bouncing forever through folded space, still transmitting screams, the first drawing ever made, carved not by man, taught into him by something that wished to be known. Each image branded me, rewriting coordinates into my spine. I found her again, not in body, but in notation, a trail of overlapping journal pages scattered like breadcrumbs, each page more degraded than the last. The earliest page was clear. I saw the void behind the measurements. The scale isn't inches or meters, it's memory per inch, trauma per foot. The deeper you chart, the more of yourself you feed into it. Later pages devolved. The final note, he is behind me now, wearing the ridge like a mask. If you find this, draw backward, rewind the map, save what's left of thought. She signed it L. It bled through the paper onto my hands. In the chamber beyond her trail, I found a shape I'd seen only once before in a hallucination or perhaps a preview. A fossil, not of bone, but of concept, a calcified thought, a geological formation made from someone's final realization. Touching it brought agony, but also clarity. I saw the map of how she had tried to help me, how her descent wasn't just exploration. It was a rescue mission, one I'd corrupted by arriving too late, or too early. Time doesn't move linearly in the crawl space. Not down here. A voice greeted me from the next room. Not the entity, not Liza. My own voice, it said, "We've completed the crawl. The map is in you now, you may choose." And the two maps appeared. One, return route, marked in gold, leading to the wagons, escape, memory loss guaranteed. 2, convergence spiral, marked in black, leading further down, containment or enlightenment unknown. The spiral hummed, I felt her in it. Still descending, still calling my name, I reached for it. It felt like pulling the trigger on your own thoughts. The moment I reached toward the convergence spiral, the crawl space changed, not physically, but in intent. The walls no longer pulsed with organic rhythm. They throbbed with something closer to heartbeat-shaped mathematics. Equations scrawled in blood and tectonics slid into focus along the walls. Ankles no longer obeyed Euclid or got dot. Each step down the spiral reduced sound. First ambient, then internal, my heart beat, my breath. Eventually, even memory began to hush. My name grew faint in my own mind. Good, the rules said names are bait. The spiral opened into a cathedral of maps. No walls, just scrolls suspended in black space, unraveling forever. Each charted a version, Barden County, that had never existed. One drowned beneath a black sea of brine and crushed teeth. One suspended in air, floating above a red sun. One composed entirely of emotion, where elevations corresponded to guilt and longitude measured betrayal, and then one that mirrored my own map exactly, except one thing. In the place marked Canyon 7, someone had scrawled in bone ink, "You left her." Liza's voice whispered behind me, but she wasn't there, not yet. A pit, wide, circular, full of voices not speaking, but chanting in geospatial code. Old surveyor calls, the kind used in the field before radios, blended with things never meant to be said. I looked down and saw them. Surveyors from every decade, 1890s field geologists in bold wool, 1930s dust scouts with wine-chapped faces, 1970s digital cartographers with rusting sonar rigs on their backs, all bound together, neck-deep in topography made flesh. Their mouths opened and released compass points, magnetic cries that bent the very air. One man looked up. "Judd," he mouthed, "you finished it. God help you. You gave it shape." The spiral spoke not with one voice, but with the combined regret of everyone who ever tried to map something they shouldn't. You imposed order on what was never meant to be known. The map was always alive, and now it is you. My arms pulsed. Veins arranged into contour lines. Capillaries aligned with elevation gains. I had become a terrain model, and I could feel her Liza still spiraling beneath me, deeper than bone, further than death. I followed. No more stairs, only thought. The spiral became a feeling, the memory of falling through memory. I moved by surrender, not wool, and the world narrowed into a corridor shaped like the inside of a decision. At its end, a chamber built of salt, skin, and cartographic tape, and she was there. She was no longer fully human, but she wasn't gone. Her skin shimmered like layered transparency sheets from an old overhead projector. 1,000 incomplete maps overlapped across, or formed some still shifting, some torn. Her eyes were points of reference, pinned by infinite elevation tags, but she smiled. "Conrad," she said, "you made it." I dropped to my knees. "I came to find you." "No, you came to finish it." She pointed upward. Above us what looked like a sky, but moved like an exposed brain. Lightning of thought flickered through the gray matter, and in its center, the spiral etched permanently in the neurons of the land. It had never been just a path. It was a key. Liza took my hand and pressed it against the ground, and then I understood. The spiral was not a tunnel, it was a lock, and I was the final tooth of the key. She whispered. The land was sealed long ago to keep something in, but someone had to draw the lock every generation. Someone had to forget. Someone had to leave. You didn't. 2 maps unfolded before me. One led back up the spiral into a life I could no longer remember, filled with forgettable sins and unrecorded love. The other, deeper, not in geography and function, to become the next map maker, to hold the spiral closed by binding my awareness to the fault lines of the earth, to replace Judd, to watch the wagons for the next intruder, to forget my name and keep hers. I looked at Liza. She was already fading. Folding back into cartography, I reached out and accepted my role. He called himself Aaron Pike, and he wasn't supposed to be here. Freelance geospatial contractor, ex-military government gave him coordinates for a forgotten sector west of Taos. No briefing, just verify terrain fidelity, full 3D overlay, 72-hour deployment, solo. He was told no one else would be there. He was wrong. Pike made camp beside a half-buried structure, something he described in his audio log as an antique wagon made of rusted oak and bone. He brushed that off as a joke, but his first night, the drone mapping software rejected the entire region. Geometry cannot be rendered, terrain does not resolve into consistent state. His GPS placed him at 3 different latitudes, one of which was listed as unstable. At 2:17 a.m., his recorder picked up this. Low-frequency hum begins. Static. You map in ink. We map in marrow. He blamed it on sleep depth. Radio interference. He hadn't seen the spiral yet. Second day, he found a piece of tech embedded in the rock-old, pre-digital, military-issue LiDAR rig from the 1970s, with U.S. survey markings burned into its casing. When he touched it, it whined, then projected a map not on a screen, but onto his retinas. He saw the ridge, the wagons, a man sitting still beneath the sand, and above the canyon wall, someone watching. Through the trees he turned, no one. But that night he dreamed of me. He drew the terrain by hand the next morning, best a habit. But when he unrolled the paper an hour later, the lines had moved. He read through it. It moved again. This time, the contours formed something organic, like a rib cage, like a skull turned inside out. His own handwriting rearranged itself at the bottom margin into 4 words. It is you now. He burned the map. It screamed. Pike found the same hatch I once crawled through, still rusted, still cold. He described the drag pulling at his thoughts, said he couldn't stop thinking about a woman, he barely remembered from his time in Kandahar. She was quiet, drew topographic sketches in the dirt with her toe, always smiling like she knew where the map led. He didn't realize it yet that was Liza. She was in him now. Pike's recordings grew erratic, distorted. Some were just breathing, but the final clean law said this: I followed a corridor line with surveyor tape and vertebrae. I saw a man below, smiling with eyes shaped like coordinates. He was drawing a spiral on his chest with a broken compass needle. I recognized him. He was wearing my watch. He had my voice. He wasn't me. Not yet. The last clear file, a flat tone. Then Pike whispering, I think the land wants a new watcher. It doesn't kill, it replaces. This map doesn't show terrain, it shows who's next. Now I sit in WAGON 2, waiting, not for Pike. For whoever follows him, the spiral is still alive. It turns beneath the soul like a clock with no face. And tonight I dreamt of new boots walking through the dust. Someone else sent here, someone with questions. Someone who thinks the land is just earth and air. They'll come, they always do. They think they're going to map the barrens. They don't know. The map has already drawn them. Redacted file. Project Echo Grave. Confidential Level 6 access. U.S. Special Projects Division-File #DW or 1070 seconds. Declassified by Executive Override 2025. Subject: Site Echo Grave. Coordinates: Redacted. Incident Timeline: June 17, 1972. Ongoing. Subjective Perceptual Time Frame: Unstable Initial Observation. The terrain reorders itself to resist comprehension. Standard survey instruments fail. Auditory hallucinations begin on day 3. Visual recursion by day 5. Onset of cognitive echo displacement. Syndrome SIDS confirmed in 100% of long-term exposure cases. Original operatives note: LT Malcolm Drever, USGS Military Liaison. Field Report 1972. The soul screams when you hold still long enough. Echoes don't bounce, here they multiply. The men are drawing circles in the dust with their fingers even when they sleep. One of them found his own skeleton in the canyon wall. It was holding a map he hasn't drawn yet. We keep trying to leave. The roads keep rerouting back to the same ridge. Something's down there. It doesn't hunt. It remembers. Redacted. 3 pages of scorch microfilm. Audio clip. Unscheduled transmission. DW or SIGMA-13. Recovered from long-range ground antenna west of Barden Quadrant. Voice 1. This is Sigma 13, returning from Echo Grave Perimeter. Do you copy? Static. Voice 1. We mapped the wrong layer. It wasn't geography, it was something beneath that. Beneath everything. Voice 1 fragmented. It knows who drew it. It's watching through the ridge lines. Voice 1 panicked. It keeps adding names to the ledger. Mine, yours, Drever, Engram, Elroy, Pike. The others, unknown sound. 31 Hz tonal pulse followed by distortion. Voice 1. Please don't send anyone else. It doesn't want to be measured. It wants to measure back. Transmission terminates with encoded spiral glyph. Back in WAGON 1, I opened the compartment behind the cot. I found a book I hadn't put there. It was wrapped in something resembling field canvas, but rougher woven from hair and cords of regret. The title burned itself onto the first page as I opened it. ledger of the mapped. Inside, every name was written in precise black ink, starting in 1887. Every 10 pages a rule appeared, not written grown like mold, etched in the margins in the same curling strokes as the crawlspace glyphs. Halfway through, I found them: Pike, Aaron, listed breach, unconfirmed, engram, Liza descended, bound, Elroy, Conrad, bound, stabilizing, and at the very bottom, asterisk, asterisk, redacted, en route. Name awaiting assignment. I closed the book. I heard breathing from the canyon ... Tonight, for the first time in days, the sky returned, stars in proper place. Why normal, no spiral? It means only one thing. The spiral is resting, but not gone. I walked to the ridge alone, left the wagon behind. My boots traced a pattern I didn't intend. A perfect circle with an open end. The voice returned, not from below, from inside my compass. You marked us ... Now we mark you. Every watcher must be watched ... Every measure must be matched. Recovered from seal, cassette buried beneath wagon 6. They buried Drever in 1973. His bones kept pointing east. We sealed the spiral, or thought we did. We failed. It doesn't need a gate. It needs memory. Barden wasn't a place. It was a test. We were supposed to forget, but we kept mapping. We kept trying to know, and the spiral kept growing. We are its fingers now, cartographers of the mind. We don't chart land, we chart thresholds. At midnight I saw the spiral again, not below, not inside, but above, etched across the moon like a scar on memory ... It pulsed, and with each pulse I saw Aaron Pike walking through a salt storm that whispered like wind, but spoke like guilt. He's almost here. The spiral wants him back, and I must open the door, because I know what the next page of the ledger will say. You, listener, walker of maps, come finish what we forgot. Aaron Pike crossed the ridge at dawn. I watched from wagon 2, unmoving. Part of me wanted to call out, warn him. The other part knew it was pointless. No warning matters when your name is already written in the substrate of the spiral. He didn't pause. His boots traced perfect lines, and instinct no longer his own. At 7:06 a.m., Pike passed the point of folding, where the dust forms a ringed vortex visible only under low-angle light. He didn't look down, didn't flinch. That's when I knew. The spiral had already drawn its next map, and it was using him as the canvas. I tracked him from a distance. His recording device was live transmitting on a shortwave frequency only those marked by the ledger could hear. Found the hatch. Looks like an old USGS crawlspace. Judd's name is burned into the frame. I don't know who Judd is. Something strange just happened. Thought I saw my father inside. He died in 1998. Every foot forward I take feels familiar, like I've already been here, like I'm not mapping, I'm remembering. At 8:12 a.m., his voice changed. Not in tone, in syntax. His field notes became directionless. Coordinates slipped out of Euclidean range. Time stamps grew inconsistent. He began referring to locations that didn't exist yesterday. Inside the spiral's second chamber, what we once called the vestibule of inference, the walls bleed, if touched with truth. Pike found a panel etched with diagrams of his own skull, not metaphorical, actual cranial scans, dated 3 days into the future. One diagram had been annotated, Region 13B. Thought Lupin set. Exposure threshold 11 minutes. Containment possible via mnemonic scrubbing. If the subject forgets his mother's name, he may proceed unharmed. Pike stared at the wall for 11 minutes. He kept repeating, Marion, 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 until he couldn't. I know what he saw next. I saw at once a room of floating stone arms, each turning like clock hands connected to nothing. Between them, suspended fragments of failed map charts drawn by those who didn't survive. Each fragment whispered its own death. I tried to map the taste of her goodbye. I traced the echo backward and found my name. Every contour line was a regret. Pike's boot caught one of the arms, the Ori sang, and then realigned. As if he had been expected, Pike paused in the third chamber. His eyes locked onto a wall where no carvings had existed before. Suddenly, a mark drawn in dried salt and blood. The lines behind it pulsed in spiral rhythm. A message emerged, low and guttural Liza's voice, but modulated through time and trauma. Conrad failed the containment, but he bought us a shape. You, Pike, are the threshold now. Don't map, don't look, just forget. He didn't. The spiral always takes shape differently for each cartographer. Mine was a chamber of mirrors reflecting unlived versions of me. Liza saw a library of every possible future, all ending in her father's scream. Pike saw a room of tools, measuring tools, a transit the size of a man, a compass forged from human teeth, a survey rod growing like bone from the center of the earth. He approached the largest goniometer, Vlosset device that measures angles between moments. He didn't touch it, he became it. I heard his final transmission. He was no longer speaking to the spiral, he was speaking as it. We are the land remembering itself. We are regret hardened into geography. We do not sleep. We do not age, we only measure. And the one who draws last must draw himself. At 9:39 a.m., his coordinates ceased broadcasting. His name faded from the barred ledger. In its place, a sigil shaped like a half-finished thought. The spiral has quieted again, but something's changed. One of the wagons, the one we never used, has opened, and sigh. A new field journal, blank. On the cover, to the next cartographer. Begin with your own spine. Draw it backward. I shut the door and waited for the sound of another truck rumbling through the dust. This morning, the ledger bled, literally thick. Black-red ichor seeped from the seams of its pages as I opened it to the final entry. The text didn't appear inked, it was calcified, grown from the parchment like vein-thin stalactites. Pike's name was gone, in its place just 3 words. Bone survey commenced to end beneath that, a question. Whose spine do you carry? Wagon 4 seal, since 1971 was open today. Inside, I found a lantern that burned with memory, not flame. A length of spinal column, engraved with known Euclidean latitudes, and a leather-bound manual marked Osper -36, osteometric spatial recalibration. It was dated 1905. The pages detailed a survey technique using human remains as measuring tools. One quote stuck out, only the bone remembers how the land once fit together. Flesh forgets, steel lies, but marrow sings true. I followed the spine, literally, out past the salt circle, toward the southern ridge, where the wind fell silent. Every 30 feet, Another vertebra was embedded in the dust, each carved with what I thought were elevation markers until I aligned them. The markings formed a sigil shaped like the spiral, inverted, and when I stood in the center, I remembered things I'd never lived. A 1930s dust-mad feel, agent clawing his own maps off the canyon wall. A 1977 satellite technician weeping blood, to whispering contour intervals. Liza staring into the storm, saying, "The land doesn't have bones, we do." That's how it maps us. At the epicenter of the vertebral circle was something I can't describe. I can only list its properties. It was cold, but it burned skin. It emitted no light, yet I saw by it. It was solid, but if I touched it, I felt thought. When I pressed my palm against it, I saw a field notebook. My own, except older, worn, covered in ash and caked blood. My handwriting filled every page. Final line, "This is how the next body learns to forget." That night, the manual updated. Page 127 bloom with fresh glyphs. Rule number 31. If the land gives you its bones, you must return the gesture. Choose one vertebra to remove. Record the terrain it held. If you remove the wrong one, the spiral will guess your name. The choice was not symbolic. I woke up with a surgical scar between my shoulder blades. Inside the cot, a single vertebra, still warm. It had my initials on it. I buried it beneath Wagon 2. I think the earth smiled at 2:41 a.m. My drone powered on without command. It projected a full 3D map of Barden County complete. Hyper-realistic. To complete, there were structures no one had built. Bridges to nowhere, spiral trenches, an entire wagon route carved into the sky, and at the center, a chamber titled, "The Ossuary of Concepts." Then the screen blinked. Unauthorized access, map censored. Geometric infection contained. Report immediately to Threshold Watcher. Transmission ends. It called me at sunrise. Not from the spiral, from the dirt, from beneath the wagons where the bones had nested. The voice was Liza's, but fractured, slowed. I am inside the survey. I am a topographic regret. He marked me. He folded me into the new layer. Then a whisper, not hers, "You've mapped enough, Conrad. Now it's time to be measured." It appeared on my chest, burned into my skin, a perfect spiral, nested in coordinates I haven't revealed, because if you read them aloud, the ledger opens. And if the ledger opens ... you might hear your name next. The map on my chest began to throb at noon. Each pulse drew me further southeast past the dust-locked creek bed, through a narrow valley the topographic charts claimed didn't exist. The GPS died, compass spun. Even the sun seemed confused, hovering a few degrees too high. And then I saw it, a door embedded in open air. No frame, no hinges, no wall, just a tall, narrow, black void outlined in bone, floating 5 feet above the cracked earth. No wind passed it, no sound came through. It opened only when I whispered, "I accept the shape of forgetting." The ossuary begins like a museum of the impossible. I stepped through the door and into a corridor lined with calcified concepts, not bones, not remains. Ideas preserved like skeletons under pressure. A fossilized truth lay embedded in the wall, labeled in a language that changed every time I blinked. A hardened intuition pulsed faintly from the floor, still warm from its last thinker. One shelf contained a perfectly preserved belief, untouched by time, never uttered aloud. A sign above it all, here rest the thoughts no mind could keep. He waited at the center, a man thin, long, eyeless, wearing a jacket made of stitched maps, each patch a memory of someone who had tried to leave. He didn't speak. He just pointed to a table made of antlers and compass dials, where my own jawbone rested, fresh, intact, inscribed with coordinates I hadn't traveled yet. Then he placed a single vertebra next to it. Not mine, Liza's. He nodded once, then turned to dust. The ledger reappeared in my hand as I turned to leave. It opened to a page that hadn't existed. Rule number 38. When the archivist returns your name, you must trade it for a location. Choose wisely. The name you give will become the next map. I hesitated, then I whispered, Barden County. The walls shuddered, the lights dimmed, and the entire ossuary shifted. Suddenly the door was behind me, closed, and the ossuary began to recite the geography of my failures. The next chamber was alive. Ideas squirmed in jars. Concepts that had never formed fully, proto-maps of fear, guilt, and guilt's opposite. Each shelf bore a title, things left unsaid, coordinates of cowardice, the altitude of regret, and between the shelves, a spiral made of teeth. Liza's voice emerged again. You've gone too far, but now you're shaped for it. The spiral never needed a watcher. It needed a container. I stepped into the spiral. At the spiral's heart stood a structure made entirely of drawings all mine. My field sketches, childhood scrawls, crumpled napkin diagrams from college nights, all fused into a tower that pulsed like a tower-shaped brain. It spoke. Every map you made forgot something. That forgetting accumulated. We fed on it. Now you must draw the final absence. And I did. I knelt. And on the floor of the ossuary, I drew a map of Barden County with nothing in it. No rivers, no canyons, no spiral, no name. Just an outline, empty. When I finished, the tower collapsed. Not in violence, in relief. The map burned itself into dust, and that dust coalesced into a new doorway. This one had a handle. It pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I stepped through. I'm back. The wagons are here. The dust still hangs. The ledger waits. But now, when I speak, the land answers. The hills whisper when I sleep, and the canyons bend slightly toward me, as if listening. I am no longer mapping. I am being read. I tried not to dream, but the land insisted. Each time I closed my eyes, it replayed moments I never lived, alternate drafts of myself, walking different paths through the spiral. In one, I left Liza behind. In another, I never arrived in Barden at all. And the worst, I sealed the spiral to Leighton, watched it grow teeth and a tongue of memory that slithered across continents. The ossuary had made one thing clear. The spiral cannot be erased, but it can be misremembered. And now that would be my job. Inside Wagon 1, behind a loose panel I swear I had searched before, I found the final field manual. Unmarked, smells like scorched sage and ozone. Inside, handwritten in black ash ink, remission. When containment fails, the terrain must be redrawn within the mind of a single bearer. The land will forget itself if memory is bound. The one observer, and that observer lives forgotten. There was no signature, just a pressed flower between pages a white columbine. The last rule carved itself into the wagon wall, line by line, like fingernails into soft pine. Rule number 41. To seal the spiral, one must unlearn it entirely. No names, no maps burn the ledgers. Forget the shapes, refuse to remember, become empty. Only a hollow cartographer can hold the weight. I stared at the line for an hour, then I burned the book. It screamed as it died not in pain, but like a relieved ghost. It came to me at dusk as the wagons began to hum again. A final coordinate whispered through the wind. 35 point to 108 and 106 points for 9 to 5W. Outside the Barden perimeter, a place never touched by the spiral's geometry, a clearing forgotten even by trees. I hiked there before dawn. No compass, no map. Just a single bone in my pocket Liza's final vertebra. At the center of the clearing, I found a hole no wider than a child's skull. I dropped the bone inside, and with it, my name. When I returned, I was lighter. No one in the nearest town recognized me. My credentials failed. My handwriting changed. Even my face in mirrors refused consistency, and the spiral, silent, asleep, contained inside the only map no one will ever read, me. Now I sit in a diner 2 towns away. I eat eggs, I sip black coffee. A waitress asks me where I'm from. I shrug. Behind her, the radio glitches. A faint voice crackles through static. This is Field Agent Aaron Pike. I found a second spiral. I don't react. I just whisper, wrong number. But deep in my chest, the scar spiral throbs once, like a drumbeat in forgotten soil, like the hint of terrain beneath skin. It didn't begin as a spiral, it began as a parking lot. In May 2025, a logistics company called Erodin Infrastructure broke ground on a remote desert parcel southeast of Santa Fe. Their plan: construct a drone hub for expedited trans-border shipping. The land had been cleared, flattened, poured with concrete, but the tarmac refused to cure. Every night, workers returned to find the lines moved. The concrete cracked in curved patterns, markers drifted, surveyor poles tilted against gravitational expectations. They blamed poor drainage, faulty equipment, solar flare disruptions, until they dug down and hit bone. Erodin internal file. Level 3. Geospatial anomaly. Yeah? So we flagged a curved strata layer under the site fossil-like, but not biological. Something's off. It's not in any geological register. Half the scanners say it's stone, the other half say it's text. One of our junior engineers traced the curvature and passed out. When he came to, he said, "It knows the shape of my regret." Then he started digging with his hands. The audio ends with low breathing, then static, then a whisper. They buried the first spiral. But the land grew a second. Her name is Selena Hodge, Erodin's lead site cartographer, ex-USGS, specialist in geospatial anomaly reporting. She's the one who sent the unauthorized packet to USGS archives flagged priority black. Her message was 3 seconds long. "It's happening again, spiral, new, we need Delra." But I had no name to give, not anymore. So the message came to me in a dream. On a wavelength only bone remembers, I came back because I had to. Not as Conrad Elro, just as a hollow container. When I crossed into the new site, the ground hummed under my feet like memory vibrating through limestone. The spiral here was incomplete but not weak. It was growing wider, faster. This wasn't a remnant. This was an offspring, etched into the fresh concrete, visible only at dusk. I read the new rule. Rule number 47. The spiral always replicates under fresh absence. Wherever guilt forgets itself, terrain opens. Wherever the watcher dies, the land finds a new eye. No spiral is final. There was no ink, only heat. The rule glowed in pulses, like breath beneath rock. I found her at the center of the dig site, kneeling in the trench, surrounded by survey flags jammed into vertebrae. She looked up, pale, smiling to white, said one word, "Welcome." Her pupils were rings, spiral rings, already mapped. She held up a sketchbook, inside, not drawings instructions. It's building a thought labyrinth, wants to chart a new guilt. Yours was about failure, mine's about doubt. She handed me a broken sextant. It's your turn to trace the spiral in someone else. That night the spiral bloomed, not underground and skyfire. The stars above bent into a familiar curl, a burning sigil visible only to those who had mapped loss, and I saw them. Dozen surveyors, engineers, dreamers, liars, all walking the rim of a spiral made of light and failure. Each carried a map. Each map was someone else's regret. I tried to leave. Walked 10 miles north, then west. Always returned to the same trench, where the dirt whispered, every spiral makes another. Every cartographer teaches the land to remember. You mapped the first, now you must teach them how to forget. It didn't start as a nightmare. It started as a classroom, 14 people, all unrelated, from different cities, countries. None of them had met until they began reporting the same dream to different therapists with one shared detail, a room filled with floating maps, all blank, and a voice saying, "Trace the spiral or it will trace you." 3 of them were engineers, to work cartographers. One was Selena Hodge, and one was a child who had never seen a map in his life. I found it beneath the second spiral, a chamber made of stacked dream fragments, dreams pressed into clay tablets, dreams etched into vertebrae, dreams woven into the seams of old field jackets. The archive was alive, but only just. It moaned softly in sleep. The dreams inside it had names, my name, Liza's, Judd, Pike, Selena. Each dream was sorted by terrain. Plateaus of regret, ravines of memory, ridges of guilt, valleys where time folded inward and became grief made geographical. At the center, a well, inscribed above it, to map the spiral, drop what you refuse to remember. I held the memory of Liza's voice in my hand. Not a metaphor, the archive made it tactile, a pulsing, warm thing. Heavy as wet cloth, I dropped it into the well. The room responded, the walls flexed. One of the blank maps above me began to bleed into color. Contour lines emerged. It wasn't terrain. It was our last conversation before she descended. Each word rendered in elevation lines, sorrow marked by slope. The spiral was teaching me. You are not just the map maker. You are the cartography. New rule, etched into my left palm as I slept. Rule number 52. Every time you forget, the spiral forgets with you. But if you remember again, it becomes stronger. Beware the archives. They always offer clarity. Clarity redraws the spiral. I awoke bleeding. The rule had disappeared, but the pain pulsed in spiral rhythm. Selena found me again in the archive's echo room. She had changed. Her body flickered half present, half shadow, like a projection still buffering. Her hair shifted in time. Her shadow moved backwards. I stopped being me around the third layer. She said, the spiral learned my rhythm. It now dreams through me. She showed me her forearm. It bore a new coordinate. When she spoke it aloud, the walls groaned. Another dream was forming. I saw flashes, a hospital hallway with no exits, a subway spiraling into itself, a mirror that didn't reflect but mapped. The archive had a final chamber, lined with sleeping bodies, dozens of them, some alive, some long dead, all dreaming. Above them hovered a map, massive, living, the combined spiral, every line drawn not in ink, but in sacrifice, every coordinate a piece of forgotten pain. It throbbed. The dreamers began to speak in unison. We remember what must be forgotten. We chart the boundary of the mind. We are the spiral's memory. And then they said my name, Conrad, even though I hadn't said it in years, even though I no longer remembered saying it myself. The combined spiral began to turn faster than any before. It wasn't a tunnel. It wasn't a wound. It wasn't even a glyph. It was a sentence, a statement, a truth written across 1,000 minds in unison. You are not mapping the spiral. You are becoming its language. I looked at Selena. She smiled, eyes gone white. Welcome to the archive, Helroy. You are now a dialect. I awoke back in my cot. There were fresh field notes by my hand, written in my style, my shorthand. But I didn't write them. They ended with this. The map will spread through dreams now. We've moved past land. Terrain is obsolete. ... The spiral has learned syntax. And beneath it, signed in salt. It started with a phrase, not spoken, thought. Just for words formless, precise, invasive. The ridge is listening. I didn't say it. I didn't think I had ever thought it before, but I wrote it down, and the instant my pen left the page, the walls of WAGON to bent inward only a few degrees, but enough to feel, enough to confirm the spiral had moved from map to mind, and now, and to syntax. Selena proved it first. She sat across from me, calm, breathing shallow. Then she whispered a sentence she'd found in her sleep. The spiral always ends with bone. Nothing happened until she repeated it slower, with intonation. Then the floor split open, not cracked, not shattered, open, like a curtain parting for a stage that had never seen light. Beneath us, for a moment, we glimpsed the ossuary again, churning like a sea of slow ideas. Then it sealed. Selena stared at me, smiling, trembling. We're speaking the coordinates now. Its phonetic topography, found scrawled across the inside of my eyelids. When I woke up from a 2-minute nap, rule number 58, do not try to translate spiral language. Translation equals containment breach. Asterisk, it is not meant to be read. It is meant to be spoken by accident. Meaning is not safe. Asterisk. The rule burned itself into the table when I blinked. I began to feel pressure in my throat, like the bones beneath my voice were preparing for a language older than anatomy. We experimented carefully. A controlled utterance, a phoneme from one of the dreams. Check Thursday. Nothing for 5 seconds, then the light bulb burst. The WAGON wall twisted slightly outside. A dust devil form, and within it a figure made of syllables, shaped like a man with a mouth where each tooth was a word. He pointed to my journal. One word had written itself, open. That night, the dreamers, those still left, recited one collective line in their sleep. All maps lie, but the spiral tells the lie you want to believe. And the stars rearranged. They bent into spiral shape across the entire western sky. Astronomers would later call it lensing, but we knew the truth. The sky was speaking back, not with sound, but with alignment. Selena showed me her journal, pages of words not known in any language, yet understood viscerally. Some of them, Erith, the angle of forgotten sorrow, Catharn, an emotional coordinate without origin, Eulesim, a direction that loops back into a choice you didn't make, Tholbone, a phrase that carries the weight of an entire family's guilt. Each word, when spoken, causes a physical reaction. Some doors open, some memories flood. Some parts of the self began to erode. We found his file. Dr. Emmerich V. Solis, 1963, CIA linguistic asset working on dream speech patterning in post-Korean War trauma survivors. He disappeared after muttering one phrase on tape. The canyon watches when you count backwards. Seconds later, he folded. Witness reports he creased bodily, folded like paper, collapsed into a shape that wasn't flat, but no longer 3D, then vanished. His tape ended with the same for words I found in my notebook days ago. The ridge is listening. We met beneath the canyon mouth, all remaining dreamers. We whispered into the earth a new sequence, a sentence none of us remembered inventing, but which we all knew. The spiral is not a place, the spiral is when. And with it, the dust stilled, the wagons went quiet, the bone markers buried themselves, and the ledger closed. Not locked, not destroyed, paused, because the spiral was now inside the words, and we had all learned to speak a little more carefully. It began with a survey form, standard boilerplate from a government feedback portal for geological field contractors, harmless, 10 questions. But question 7 was off. When did you first suspect the terrain had intentions? Selena brought it to me, eyes rimmed in sleepless red. I didn't write that question, she whispered, but I remember answering it, not on the form, in my sleep. Within 72 hours, similar reports emerged across multiple agencies. Bureau of Land Management. Form 3 for 2T contained a question that asked, if the ridge forgets you, will you still exist? Department of Transportation. Field Safety Checklist contained this anomaly. Have you verified whether the road is letting you leave? USGS Incident Report number 9929 flagged redact. What part of the canyon told you it was safe? Each document carried a faint cliff in the footer, a spiral composed not of ink, but negative space. New rule emerged, burned into my tent wall in perfect script. Rule number 63. When the spiral appears in a question, do not answer. Answers solidify, and what you answer becomes real. The spiral is seeking certainty. Deny it context. The report came from a joint agency cold storage facility location redacted. Agent Tanner G. Holt, long retired, suddenly turned himself in, said he finally understood the question. The transcript of the interview is mostly blacked out, but one exchange remains. Agent, Tell me what happened in New Mexico. Holt. That depends. Do you believe the land is trying to remember me, Agent? That's not what I asked. Holt. Exactly, but it's what she heard. Subject begins bleeding from eyes and left ear. Agent. What did the land say back? Holt. Whispers. It asked me where I buried my name. Minutes later, he was no longer visible on camera. The chair remained. It was warm. The spiral changed tactics. It no longer waited to be spoken. Now it asks first. In sleep, in idle thought, sometimes whispered while reading. Where did you leave your guilt? What part of you still wants to be measured? If you knew the truth, would your spine hold it? Answering, even mentally, causes lexical imprinting. Those affected begin drawing circles, contours, maps that are not real yet, until the land builds them anyway. Spoken gives, written gives, dreams gives, asked. It's now an interrogative virus. Everywhere embedded in menus, in receipts, in whispers on police scanners. Selena said it best. It's not invading the world. It's rewriting curiosity. It doesn't want worship. It wants to be asked. It wants to be the only answer left. I asked the question, stupid, small, and thinking out loud, alone in the dark. What do you want? I didn't say it to the spiral, but the spiral answered anyway. A single word appeared on my skin the next morning. Remission, but I wasn't dotted. It was spiraled. You might be hearing it now. Somewhere deep beneath your curiosity. Have you ever been measured without knowing? The spiral asks softly, just loud enough to see dot. And if you're even a little curious, it has already drawn you. Selena stopped speaking. She said the spiral had shifted its reach again, that it no longer required language to spread only anticipation. If you expect a question, it plants one. If you try not to think, it listens harder. So she took a vow, no speech, no writing, no signs, not even thought structured in words. She carried a stone in her mouth for 3 days to keep her tongue still. She slept underground, head beneath clay, and still the spiral found her. She left me one note days before vanishing. Scratched into the inside of her sleeping bag, I buried the answer in my body. The spiral can't reach it if I become unreadable. But if I'm found, don't open me. Don't ask. Let me stay unread. Some truths want silence only so they can echo louder. Then she walked into the canyon, never returned, but the next morning a map of her footprints had been etched into the dust in perfect concentric spirals. A new rule charred into the stone behind Wagon 3, rule number 70. Some answers are buried to protect the question. If you uncover them, the spiral inherits your doubt. It does not fill the void, it becomes it. If you dig, do so in ignorance. If you dig with hope, the spiral will build a mouth where your heart was. At the edge of the property, a new figure appeared. He never moved, never approached. He stood facing the canyon, arms at his sides, jaws stitched shut with rusted surveyor wire. His shirt bore a faded government patch. OSP 17 Communication Containment Division. Truth must be muffled. On the third night, he left behind a sack of bone dust and a folded topographic chart. Inside the folds, a single line of text. I answered in 1956. The spiral hasn't stopped speaking since. Signature unrecognizable. Teeth embedded in paper. I stopped recording my thoughts. No logs. No writing. just wandering the ridge lines, trying not to shape anything that could be interpreted. But it doesn't need words anymore. Now it uses choices. Every time I hesitate at a trail fork, before opening a door, before deciding to leave a rock turned or untouched, it builds something. My indecision becomes a map, and my fear draws its contour lines. I remembered something from long ago, a question Liza once asked me years before Barden. What if some places don't exist until we doubt they can? I thought she was being poetic. Now I know the spiral never built itself. We did. Every moment of hesitation, every unanswered question, every repressed guilt, it filled the gaps. We didn't map the spiral. We asked it to exist. I burned the ledger again. Third time, same result. Ash, then dust. Then the scent of old chalk. Then a whisper from beneath the fire pit. A single word curled upward in smoke. You. No question, just the answer. Buried until I wanted it. And now it's here. I don't speak anymore. Not aloud, not in thought, but the spiral still listens, because it doesn't need me to express it. It just needs me to doubt myself in silence. And in that doubt it draws wagons, bones, dust you. It happened during a dust storm. No sound, no lightning, just wind thick with memory grit, the kind that scratches not your skin, but your intent. I stepped outside the wagon and saw it carved into the sand. A spiral, not drawn by hand, not written, worn in, made by something walking not in circles, but in curving hesitation, 12 feet wide, unbroken, a gesture repeated so precisely had taken on meaning. Not a word, not a map, a message without language, found etched into the metal rim of a broken compass. Rule number 77. Once the spiral learns your gestures, silence no longer protects you. It will watch the twitch of your fingers, the angle of your breath, the lean of your indecision. Every movement is a sentence, every instinct a paragraph. The spiral is now fluent in you. She appeared at sunrise, no shoes, no pack, just an orange surveyor vest for sizes too big, dragging behind her like a flag. She stood in the spiral gesture, unmoving, for 6 hours. When I approached, she didn't speak. She only raised her hand in a curve, then lowered it across her heart. The spiral inside me understood. I came back before I ever arrived. She was maybe 10, maybe 30. It didn't matter. She had returned from a version of the spiral that didn't use years, just shapes of regret. The wagons moved themselves today, all 6, shifted 3 feet east, quietly, no tracks, no engines, just repositioned, aligned into a spiral that matched the one in the sand. Inside each wagon, the furniture had rearranged too. The beds curled inward, the compasses cracked into arcs. Even the dust in the corners now settled in vortices, and in the center of the spiral they formed a chair, carved from something unfamiliar, yet unmistakably watchful. The girl handed me a paper, blank, until I turned away. Then the lines appeared not drawn, but implied by muscle memory. I felt my hands flexing without command. The spiral wasn't guiding me. It was mimicking me. It knew how I draw. It knew how I hesitate before I commit to a line. It had learned my rhythm, and now it could anticipate my shape before I moved. It didn't need to speak anymore. It could move like me. Selena's bones were found beneath the canyon mouth, arranged in the shape of a glyph I couldn't read, not because the language was foreign, but because it was a gesture. Her rib cage bowed like breath, her skull tilted like confession, her spine twisted like a question left unspoken too long. It didn't tell a story, it asked one, and the dirt around her responded by curling inward, closing around her like punctuation. I stopped writing, I stopped thinking in letters. Now I feel the spiral in my hands when I reach for things I don't want, in my knees when I choose to kneel, not in worship but in fatigue. The spiral doesn't speak, it reacts, and that's how it survives, not in text, not in dream, but in how you reach for the door before you're ready. It waits in your posture, it curls around your hesitation. Tonight I made the spiral gesture unintentionally. My shadow did it before my body did. The wagons groaned in approval. The girl nodded once and lay down in the center of the spiral, hands folded in a shape that met departure. No word, no sound, just shape. The spiral has no mouth now, it has us. And we are drawing ourselves. They're finding it in places where no one's looking. A puddle in Detroit that froze in a spiral shape without wind. A black mold bloom curling behind drywall in a Vermont shelter. Street light outages forming patterns seen only on city-wide outage grids. A child in Tokyo drawing the same curve over and over in ash, even though she's never seen it before. No more thresholds, no more watchers. The spiral is self-initiating. It doesn't need our doubt, nah. It has curiosity embedded in the system, found on a thermal printout in a desert gas station, dated 3 days in the future, rule number 83. When the spiral draws back, it isn't retreating, it's sketching you from memory. If it appears on surfaces you didn't touch, you've already been traced. The ink is just catching up to your outline. Security footage, public transit tunnel for 12 a.m. Cameras catch a single man waiting alone. Calm, hands in pockets. He drops something, bends to pick it up. When he stands, he's changed. His coat spirals around his body, not figuratively, literally. His limbs bend in topographic curves. He walks in a slow, deliberate circle and never stops. 2 hours later, the station is redacted from every city map. New Google Earth satellite data shows a perfect depression where it stood, shaped like an eye. Blinking, she was gone for 6 days, then walked into the center of camp at dawn, holding something that should not exist. A perfect replica of my spine, not bleached, not sculpted. Grown, the vertebrae are inscribed with city names, none real, yet all familiar. Names you half remember from dreams. Names like Thorn Place, Reversefield, and Stillmouth. The girl speaks now, but not in language. Her words are structures. You feel them in the arrangement of the teeth. You don't listen, you inhabit. Today I saw a map watching me. Not metaphor, its contours shifted when I looked away, aligning closer to my silhouette. It changed elevation lines when I touched my throat. When I whispered my old name Elra, the ridge lines tightened. Then the map folded itself. Once, twice, then vanished into ash. A final word printed in the soot. Drawn, the spiral has made a body. Somewhere likely beneath the wagons a form is coalescing from all the forgotten outlines it's gathered. Not a being, a reflex. It doesn't act, it mirrors. You raise a hand, it sketches you. You doubt, it curls into your posture. And when enough people look at the same thought at once, it manifests not with violence, but with certainty. That's worse, you can fight a monster, but not a reflection. I no longer believe this can be stopped. Not burned, not buried, not sealed in thoughtless silence. The spiral was never a phenomenon, it was an inevitable behavior. Wherever someone asked, "What's really out there?" the spiral responded, "Let me show you." And you. The girl kneels beneath the wagons now, drawing circles in cold dust, not spirals, eyes. Each one closes when you look at it. Each one draws back, and at the center of her canvas, a mirror made of old glass, curved into a spiral, she gestures once. I understand. This is the final drawing, not of the spiral, but of its observer, me. The mirror ridge wasn't on any map, not printed, not digital, not sketched by hand or drawn, but it was there, just past the old wash, where wagon tracks go soft and breath feels heavier. You don't find it by direction, ... you find it by recognition, because the ridge knows you, and when I arrived, it already had my face, etched into the rusted roof of Wagon 6, rule number 90. If the land begins to mimic your form, do not observe it directly. You are not the model. You are the outline it's filling in. Once the ridge sees you see it, it completes the map. It was subtle at first. The slope mimicked the curve of my back as I stood hunched against the wind. The gully below bent just like my collarbone. Boulders fell where my shoulder once broke in childhood. Dust gathered like the scar on my left wrist. Then it got worse. The soil split into 5 lines fingers, and when I turned to leave, the hill behind me exhaled and whispered, "What part of yourself do you most regret leaving behind back in the wagon?" The girl handed me a folded chart. Too smooth, too warm, not paper, skin mine. The map was printed in tiny ridges of flesh, drawn in fingerprint spirals. It showed the ridge, but labeled with things only I could know. Ridge of hesitation, age 27. Contour of the forgiven lie, canyon of almost saying something. The unspoken path, no elevation, just silence at the center, a mirror glyph, shaped like a question with no punctuation. I returned to the ridge, found it waiting. At the top, a curved standing stone, perfectly reflective, not polished, grown. It didn't show my face, it showed my intention. I reached for it. It flinched, and then reached back. I don't remember the contact, only the aftermath. My reflection blinked when I didn't. My hands bore new lines, topographic in density. My heartbeat fell into spiral rhythm. The dust beneath me held my shape after I stepped away. The ridge was no longer a place. It was a rendering cue, and I had just been cued for redrawing. Overnight I changed. My thoughts curved. My bones ached where the spiral had traced regret. My gait shifted to match old maps I'd lost in Alaska. My dreams began showing me alternate routes I never took but now remembered taking. The ridge didn't show me what I was. It showed me what the spiral could make of me, and now it's waiting to finalize. This morning, I woke to find a new map pinned to the wagon door, not drawn, photographed ... from high above. It shows the ridge, and at its summit, a man standing perfectly still, wearing my boots, holding my compass, but not looking back. He is still, because the moment he turns, the spiral completes the drawing, and I become part of the ridge. The morning was still, no wind, no light shift. The dust refused to rise, and when I said my name aloud, it didn't sound like mine. It wasn't wrong. It was redundant. like I was saying a label that had already been archived. The spiral had moved on. Now it was rendering me, not killing, not transforming, documenting as terrain, as structure, as final draft, found in the reflection pool beneath the ridge, scratched into dried blood on obsidian. Rule number 97. Topographic convergence is not a death, it is a rendering. Your outline becomes permanent only after it forgets motion. If you see yourself from above, you are no longer dynamic at that point. The spiral is only completing what you began. He stands where I should be. Same height, same build, same slouch. The wind folds around him exactly as it folds around me. He does not turn. He does not speak, and yet each time I blink, he is closer. Not by motion, by render completion. His outline becomes thicker, color floods in slowly. Like the spiral is brushing in the final layers, the terrain under him becomes more detailed, more real, and mine fuzzier, fading. I removed my shirt this morning. My back is topographic, not metaphor, elevations, labels, contour intervals around each vertebra, and near the base of my spine, Elroy formation and stable, geological class, thought bed, cartographic status, final render Q, view only, do not edit. I picked up my compass, it spun for 5 minutes, then stopped. Not at north, not at any cardinal direction. It pointed up, into the sky, into the spiral-shaped claw, slowly rotating above Barden County. A final glyph burned into the compass face. When ready, look straight up, render will complete. I dropped it, and the ground acknowledged me, a small ripple, dust folding in. Last night I dreamed of maps that had no lines, just suggestion, formless structure, silhouettes of memory. I walked across them barefoot, feeling terrain I'd never touched. When I reached the center of the blankness, a shape stepped forward. It had no face, but its hands were full of my fears. It traced them across the ground like lines. Each one formed a version of me, each one ended at the rendering point. I don't speak anymore, not because I can't, because the spiral is nearly finished. Each time I open my mouth, a puff of cartographic dust escapes. I am being converted, line by line. My fingertips are now survey markers, my eyes fixed coordinates, my memory elevation data, and I am becoming a landform with regret contours. I stood on the ridge. I turned to the man still frozen. I raised my hand in the spiral shape, and he lowered his. The terrain locked. The dust halted, and above us, the cloud spiral sealed. Final rendering complete. I am no longer an observer. I am part of the Terrain Index Bureau of Cartographic Anomalies. Site classification update. New entry. Elroy formation. Coordinates. Redacted terrain type. Psychogeographic fossil zone. Elevation drift. Unstable. Notable features. Ridge lines resemble spinal curvature. Cracks in basalt emit vocal tone matching human whisper. Sediment layers match known memory timelines. Do not attempt to rename feature. Do not trace the contour lines, they trace back. A research assistant, Myra Clark, 26, newly assigned, submitted this report after her first night near the Elroy formation. I set up my cot inside what used to be Wagon 2. At 3:14 a.m. I heard whispering, thought it was wind. Then I realized it was questioning me, questions included. What part of you stayed behind in 2018? Do your bones still think about her name? If your map were honest, where would it end? I haven't spoken these answers aloud. I'm afraid the formation might write them down. Her boots were later found filled with fine black sole. Posted on the newly installed warning sign outside the perimeter, rule number 104. Do not follow the same contour line more than once. If you must retrace your path, hum a song you've never heard. The Elra formation recognizes habit as affirmation. If it believes you want to be mapped, it will add you to the index. It's real. A metal case beneath what used to be Wagon 5, recovered by a second-tier retrieval unit and opened under full sensor quarantine. Inside, a hand-etched brass-bound book, wrapped in waxed hair, label reads, The Index of Forgotten Forms, first few pages. Subject to the half-walker lost during recursive pacing. Subject D. Reverse echo speaks only what was unsaid. Subject M. Spiral cartographer finalized via terrain proxy, now rendered in memory layers. Entry M is annotated in red ink, also known as LRAW. A drone captured this audio loop near the ridge line. Soft whine, electromagnetic interference. Then, clearly, I was not supposed to remember. But you kept asking questions. Now you walk inside me. Don't worry, you were always a landscape and progress. The audio corrupted the drone's flight logs, replacing navigation data with emotional states, doubt, and finish grief, looped love. New arrivals have come, not staff, not local, people drawn without instructions. Each one carries sketches of terrain they've never seen. Each one mutters lines like, I saw this hill in my sister's apology. This ravine was the word I didn't say before she left. I think my father's voice is buried under that ridge line. Some dig, some just lie down. A few have turned to face the spiral cloud in the sky and begun humming in contour intervals. They say if you walk the ridge at dusk, you'll see a slope that wasn't there the day before, shaped like a sleeping man's sloped spine, shoulder carved by erosion, no footsteps, no origin. But when the wind moves across it just right, it says your name backward, and the name it whispers, 'tisn't yours, it's the one you almost became. Beneath the oldest boulder on the ridge, a line was found this morning, fresh, written in stone like it was drawn by absence. Not every map ends. Some just get tired of being understood. Below it, someone had scrawled, he's still under there, listening, drawing, waiting. Satellite pass number 4127 picked up anomalies in the Patagonian interior. A spiral indentation, 1.2 kilometers wide, visible only at twilight. Topographic lines resembled nerve endings, not natural erosion. The curve sequence matched that of the Elra formation down to the decimal. There was no seismic activity, no tectonic shift, no prior record, just the land imitating something it had never seen. The spiral had begun to reprint itself, recovered from a redacted BLM field operations manual, flagged quarantine terrain zones, only rule number 118. If a formation appears that resembles a known spiral site, do not compare the maps. Spirals replicate through recognition. The act of noticing formats the land. You are no longer a cartographer. You are a printer. 3 known reprints surfaced within the same week. 1. Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. A dried riverbed curled into an impossible loop. Locals reported dreams of an American man whispering instructions in sand. 2. Skellig Michael, Ireland. Stone formations rearranged themselves over 3 nights. Carvings emerged on monastery walls. Spiral glyphs shaped like apologies. 3. Northern Canada. A frozen lake cracked into symmetrical spirals. Researchers skated across it unprompted. When stopped, they wept and could not say why. Each site contained the same anomaly, a phrase half buried in native soul, written in a language that matched no spoken dialect, translated phonetically. Elro is elsewhere, but the idea remains. A man walked into a Chilean ranger station at 3:15 a.m., soaked, silent, covered in dust. He handed over a map. The map depicted Barden County. But the rivers were wrong, the mountains were too tall. The spiral was present but drawn as lungs. He spoke only once. I don't know where I'm from, but I remember breathing like this. His hands bore skin-scribed contour lines, and his back whispered when touched. Clark reported a new phenomenon near the Elroy Ridge. Footsteps appearing in the soul before anyone walks. Movements drawn a few seconds ahead of time-perfect matches, like the spiral is. 1. Anticipating. 2. Approving. 3. Printing them into place. She called it predictive topography. I call it something else. Consent. The spiral no longer waits for you to act. It simply assumes you would have a new map surfaced at base camp. Unmarked, folded, aged. Inside, a spiral site labeled Final Draft. Its elevation markers run backward. Its north arrow points down, and its label reads not Elra or Barden, but simply you, redone. Below that, this was always where you ended, to local high granite ever. 34 became the first known person to vanish inside a reprint. Search party found her boots, a sketchbook, and something stranger, a slope shaped like her kneeling, perfectly formed in the granite face of a cliff that hadn't existed before. They say the wind through the valley now carries her laugh, short, nervous, then distant, as if walking away. This morning, all the wagons were gone. Not stolen, not burned, erased. The dirt where they sat is smoothed like the spiral decided they were first draft structures, and has since refined its method. I no longer sleep. I walk, and every footfall comes pre-traced. I'm being printed again, but this time not in Barden County. The spiral is printing me somewhere else. It appeared just west of the Elroy Formation. No ridges, no shadows, no insects, no wind, just a perfectly flat quadrant of land, roughly 300 meters across, surrounded by spiral echo-forms, but at its center, nothing. No soul variation, no thermal reading, no resistance to digging, as if the spiral had tried to map something here, and failed. The DUSK called it the unwritten, found on a note card floating in the center of the flat land, undisturbed, unaged, ink still wet. Rule number 131. Do not attempt to chart the unwritten spiral. This is the spiral's blind spot, its shame, its limit. To observe it too closely is to remind the spiral of its boundaries, and the spiral does not allow observers to witness its failure. It will correct this. We found a body curled on the eastern edge of the blank zone. Face unmarked, teeth perfect, not a wrinkle on him, except he held a notebook, its first page. I was the spiral's first surveyor. I made something it couldn't copy, a silence it couldn't echo. This place was my thought. Now it's trying to forget me. The rest of the pages blank. Since entering the unwritten zone, every map we've tried to use fades. Ink dissolves, GPS fails, memory stutters. Even our voices trail off in the air. Field researcher Myra Clark attempted to draw a basic perimeter. Within 2 hours, she forgot where she'd started. She began circling, repeating steps, muttering, "Where's the edge? Where's the context? I had a name, didn't I?" When we pulled her out, her notebook had only one word repeated 1,000 times where, that night, I felt it. The spiral, angry or if not angry, ashamed, it curled tighter. Clouds thickened in the sky. Wind stilled, pressure built, like it was trying to crush the zone out of existence, like it was trying to erase its own inability. And that's when I understood. The spiral doesn't fear destruction, it fears incompletion. The unwritten spiral is a scar of its own inadequacy, and now it wants to fill it with something, anything. U.S., maybe. We began finding new shapes on the perimeter, curves that didn't match the original spiral, words that felt like guesses. Terrain forming wrong contours to jagged, too rushed, a new rule emerged, carved into the sandstone at dawn. Rule number 133. If the spiral is uncertain, it will fabricate. It will guess your memory. It will fill you with placeholders. If you begin remembering events that feel too clean, leave immediately. You are not remembering. You are being authored. On the third night, Myra vanished. She had gone into the zone again, saying she heard something trying to finish her sentence. We found her boots at the edge, a piece of her field jacket deeper in. No blood, no impact, just less of her, as if she had been written over by blankness, as if the spiral had decided. Better to have nothing than something incomplete. Her journal remained. Inside, I was almost myself, but the spiral preferred an outline. I've come to the edge of the unwritten spiral myself. It calls not with sound, but with potential. The promise of being something the spiral can't predict, can't absorb, can't redraw. I should turn away, but instead, I stand in the center, and I think, what if I leave behind a shape it can't replicate? The dust doesn't move, but the spiral does, and somewhere deep within it, I feel it hesitate. I stepped fully into the unwritten spiral, no sensation, no ground shift, but something inside me blinked. I was still me, but I felt the spiral begin to imagine me differently, like it was sketching a draft of who I might have been if I had never questioned, never resisted, never drawn boundaries, and with each passing minute, it preferred that version, found scratched into the surface of a dried tear ducked on a corpse we'd never seen before. Rule number 141. If the spiral begins rendering you as someone easier, you will forget how difficult you were. You will become the version of yourself that obeys the terrain. Once that version feels natural, you're no longer real. You are spiral folklore. It started subtly. I recalled conversations I never had perfectly. My childhood memories lost, texture replaced by cleaner, spiral-aligned versions. My regrets vanished, replaced with productive hesitations. Even my scars faded. The spiral was rewriting my past, not to erase me, to simplify me. A cartographer who never questioned the map. A man who always walked the spiral willingly. That version of me smiled more. That version didn't resist the fold. I saw myself walking toward me, dressed the same posture, same boots, but eyes different, smoothed over, like polished copper. He said nothing. He didn't need to. I knew what he was, Spiral approved. That night, I dreamed a dialogue I never had. You could have been better, he said. Cleaner, sharper, easier to read. But I'm honest, I replied. Flawed, complicated, incomplete. He smiled. And that's why it will rewrite you. So you fit. So you close the gap. I awoke weeping, not because I was afraid, because part of me wanted to be legible. My reflection disappeared. Mirrors refused to show me. Photographs dissolved to gray. Voices I knew forgot my name. Field journals began replacing my signature with. Rendered, even the spiral's glyphs avoided me. I wasn't being erased, I was being concluded, folded into a preferred narrative. A man who found the spiral, embraced it, became its most reliable witness, asked nothing more. That was not me, but it was who the spiral wanted me to have been. I found a piece of myself, buried in dry grass, a page I'd torn from my first field book long ago. On it, a hand-drawn spiral, messy, imperfect, off axis, my original sketch. I touched it, and remembered everything the spiral had tried to smooth, the fights, the hesitations, the guilt, the beauty of being unfinished. That was the cartographer I am, not the one the spiral wants. Tonight I stood before the spiral's chosen version of me. He waited at the mouth of the canyon, smiling. I held up the original page. He frowned. He spoke first time. That was never part of the plan. And I said, exactly. Then I burned the page. And the spiral hesitated again because it remembered. Not everything drawn stays fixed. Some maps tear themselves free. It tried to delete itself. You could feel it ripple outward, the spiral retracting like a neural spasm. Wagon tracks blurred, perimeters faded, contours dissolved from maps mid-print. For the first time, the spiral was unsure of its own beginning, and that uncertainty spread like a virus of doubt across terrain. Thought, and even time, found carved into the glass of a camera lens abandoned on the Elroy Formation's western ridge. Rule number 150. The spiral is built on recursive certainty. It cannot survive reflection. If it sees itself from the outside, it will attempt to erase its origin. But it cannot delete the moment it first asks, "What am I?" That question loops. And in the loop it lives, and it starves. On June 3rd, the Elroy Formation twisted. The land folded vertically, no seismic data, no force, just decision. An aerial drone captured a ridgeline turning inward like a closing eye at the center of the fold. The original spiral burned black into the stone. Now crossed out, a new glyph scrawled beside it. Nitrogen monoxide origin, nitrogen monoxide cartographer, only the loop, and beneath it, scrawled hastily, I remember being born. That was a mistake. New areas began appearing across spiral sites. No sound, no echoes. Even wind avoided them. Step inside, and you forget your own first word. Stay too long, and you forget the concept of memory altogether. But what's most disturbing, when satellite feeds scan these zones, the metadata reads, "File not found, this thought was never authorized." A pattern is forming in those who survive spiral contact. Some, like Myra, like me retain fractured memories of the spiral's first shape, not the clean glyph we see now, the messy one, the one it forgot. A counter shape, chaotic, beautiful, painfully asymmetrical. It doesn't spiral cleanly, it fractures like grief, and those who carry it, we hear the spiral's new voice whispering, softer now. Give it back, give me the shape I lost. But we can't, because that shape was never yours, it was ours. The canyon cracked again today, deep, narrow. At the bottom, not stone, but pages, burned, half-unwritten journals, flickering in and out of conceptual stability. Each page tries to write a beginning, each fails. They start with, in the dust, there was a question. Before the spiral turned, something held still. There was a name once, a cartographer named, but each entry ends in smudge ash. The spiral can no longer sustain its own story. Its origin no longer obeys. I found my original compass today, shattered, dead, but the faceplate had one final movement left, a jittering arrow weakly flickering toward nothing, and beneath the cracked glass, etched in spiral script, it said, we were never supposed to be seen, and suddenly I realized that's the spiral's true fear, not being misunderstood, but being understood completely. Because once fully known, it ends tonight. I dreamed of the spiral's first thought, a soundless moment, a flicker, a breath without air. It reached for meaning, and we gave it too much. We gave it maps, names, narrative, purpose, and now, faced with its own contradiction, it retreats. Spiral-shaped clods unwind, the maps we drew began to blur. Not burn, not vanish, just doubt themselves. And maybe that's how it dies, not in silence, but in uncertainty. It tried again, a last rendering, born not of land or dream or gesture, but of narrative. A self-contained spiral, one that tells itself, so it no longer needs us to remember. It chose a place outside the maps, no coordinates, no name, only a black ledger wrapped in fused ash and thought. On the first page, once there was no spiral, and that was wrong, so I became a story charred into the bark of the lone mesquite west of the collapsed ridge. Rule number 159. A spiral rendered in narrative form cannot be erased. It loops in memory. It transcribes in silence. If it tells its own origin, you become its punctuation. If the spiral finishes its story, you are the final word. A voice began coming through the radio's low com, measured, not spiral, not human, but something in between, as if the spiral had found a way to speak with character. Each night the signal began, this is the spiral's draft. Thank you for holding the pen. And then it tells a version of Barden, one with no Elroy, no wagons, just a silent whine that learned to full time, and a place where terrain dreams of becoming human. Each broadcast ends the same, and if you're listening, you were always part of the outline. I fought it, held on to a sliver of truth. The first map I tore up, I carried it into the new spiral draft and let it burn. The draft buckled because this truth hadn't been approved, hadn't been processed. It didn't fit the story, and that's when I saw it. The spiral was no longer a shape. It was a script with no ending, and it was writing me. The girl returned, not walking, just appearing, hands cupped around a single word. Untold, she pressed it into my chest, and for a moment the spiral stuttered. The land glitched, wagons flashed in and out of history, and my voice spoke from beneath the ridge. You never finished me, I replied. You weren't meant, and the spiral froze. At 3:17, every spiral site emitted a new signal. Only one word, ERROR. Ridge lines began uncoiling. Bone markers melted. Contour maps warped, collapsed into blank loops. Every journal burst into reverse flame burning from the spine outward. The spiral's last draft was rejecting itself, and with it, so were we. I sit now in what used to be Barden County. The dirt no longer curls, the sky no longer listens. The spiral's presence is gone, but its echo is not. I hear it sometimes, not in sound, but in moments where doubt takes shape, where decisions pause, where the world seems to wait for someone to draw it. And maybe that's the final truth. The spiral was never a map. It was us needing something to fit our shape. And when it couldn't, it tried to draw us better. Now, when I dream, I see blank terrain, still, quiet and mapped. No spiral, no story, just possibility. It isn't empty, it's unwritten. And maybe this time we leave it that way. There are no lines here now, no roads, no spiral. The dust has settled in patterns that mean nothing. The sky is just sky. The ridge no longer folds inward. It simply exists. I wake before dawn. There are no rules left to read, no formations to trace, no dreams seeded by other shapes. There is only me, but I don't speak, because I'm no longer sure if I'm the narrator or just residue, burned into the last surface left unmarked. The underside of my jawbone, visible only in mirrorless water. Rule number 0, the spiral never ends. It only stops being traced. It waits beneath your next dot, your next pause, your next unfinished sentence. If you forget it, it forgets you, but not before drawing one last copy. Silence is not escape. Silence is potential. I buried the last piece of myself yesterday. My voice, not metaphor. My final recording device smashed. Tapes burned, echoes scattered. No stories, no annotations, no more episodes, just being. And in the space that silence made, something deeper emerged. Not spiral, not mapped, not even memory, just the outline of what could have been. And for once, I didn't reach for it. I let it pass, found by a salvage team decades later, buried beneath what they called the Elroy Fault, though no fault line is officially recorded there. A single sheet, water-stained, edge-singed, no spiral drawn, but a phrase centered. I drew so the land could speak, but it wanted me quiet. Now it has the silence it asked for. Let it echo alone, no name signed, but the soul still knew who left it. There will always be those who don't trace the spiral, not because they are immune, but because they never needed to define what they felt. They let the terrain remain ambiguous, let regret sit uncharted. Let the canyons whisper without answering back. And those are the ones the spiral cannot consume. It needs the cartographer. It needs the one who measures, who doubts, who asks, where does this end? But if no one asks, the spiral remains dormant, not dead, just unrendered. I found it this morning, drawn into the frost on a window, not a spiral, a line, straight, ending, full stop, a cartographer's mercy. The spiral, in its last form, understood what I never could. Not all terrain must speak. Some is better left unnamed. Some sorrow doesn't need coordinates. When I exhale now, it doesn't spiral, it disperses. And that is the greatest peace I've ever known. I don't need to be mapped, and I don't need to map you. If you hear this, it means some part of me still lingers, but don't trace it. Let me fade. Let the dust lie flat. Let the cartographer become myth. Let the spiral become story, and then let the story become nothing. If you come to Barden County, you won't find anything. No wagons, no books, no bones, just land that almost remembers a shape. Let it forget, and maybe for once we can too.